I chose to do my final project on as a comic, and I chose to focus on issues such as how BPA folks are treated in the healthcare system, in the education system, and the stigmas that surround those issues. Because personally, as a Hispanic person, I feel like I am hypersexualized, and so I wanted to be able to portray that in this comic, and I also wanted to make sure there was diversity and representation, and ensure that I was accurately portraying what I wanted to portray without being insensitive. So this project was a good challenge for me, and yeah. So the comic centers around a family, and the youngest is a transgender pansexual, but but she is pretty young. She's still in like middle school. So the pansexuality aspect hasn't really come out very much yet because the comic was so short. But I included the flags in the introduction scenes, and her name's Alicia, and she has a sister named Shoko who is 17 and bisexual, and her character has to deal with a lot of things in the healthcare system, as is explored in the second page of the comic. Referencing things like bisexual people having higher specific risk factors for things like illicit substance use, more sex with substance use, more alcohol consumption, as was discussed in week 7 of the class. And I portrayed Shoko as going in to get STI tested, and the doctor associating the stigma of being bisexual with being, the bisexual slut, if you will. And so there are a lot of things in the comic that are highlighted in red in this scene, and I use the highlighting in red as a way to show that these are real things that happen, that people hear every day, that are quite harmful. One of the lines in the comic that is underlined or highlighted in red is, since your sexual history involves a rather large amount of both men and women. That again is the inference of an assumption that because this woman is bisexual, she is going to have a really more amount of partners. And the third character, Layton, who is was the most fun to draw for me personally, is an asexual homo-romantic person, and he is black, so there's a lot in the comic dealing with the hypersexualization of him as an asexual, that going through like the mental health care system in particular, and saying it's just a side effect of depression because of the stigmas that go with people of color being hypersexual beings that crave sex. And so when this doesn't happen, when real people exist that aren't a part of stigma, people freak out and don't really know what to do. And this was further discussed also in the same week with the healthcare disparities, but in week 7. But there's like not very much research on asexuality. The articles that we did read were mostly about bisexual women, and this is an asexual man. So it was difficult for me to portray him because since there is no asexual research really available except for the great my Ace Poly Manifesto, which was a big inspiration for me with this character, because again, while the relationship isn't really hinted, or is hinted at but not like generally talked about explicitly in the piece, I thought that it would be a good thing to reference, just so people in the class would know that that's what I was using as a reference. So those are all the characters and basically what happens, but I can underline it a bit more and reference which sources that I also use through this. The first page where Alicia is talking about her transition and her everyday life references week 4 of which was identity development, because these are her formative years, and as is shown in the comic, here. She's getting, like, verbally abused in class and misgendered and dead named, and that is a really detrimental part of identity formation, because all she'll understand for a while is that disappointment and feeling isolated and that lack of understanding. But then, as the story goes on, it focuses on her siblings, and again, like I said, the Shoko going into the doctor, and then her brother Leighton calls her, and Leighton is the oldest. Alicia's in middle school, Shoko's in high school, and Leighton's in college. I wanted to have diversity in the ages, but also have them be ages that I could connect with, so I didn't want any of the ages to be older than me or extremely younger than me to the point where I didn't have very good memories of that time. And the stigma thing that I talked about before, that was the Roberts article from week 7 about healthcare disparities. So that one was really important for me because it talked about more stigma, and that could possibly even override like the medical professionals. But anyway, so Shoko asked Leighton asked Shoko to go pick her up, pick him up from college because he's like done with class, because that's happened to all of us. And so they have a rant about the healthcare system, and in this, the themes from week 6, erasure and rejection, are referenced quite a bit. Because, like I said, the fact that there is no asexual research is an act of erasure in and of itself, because it's just not there. And trans research is also considerably less, but of course not as little as asexual. And after that, in the comic, MOP, which is something that I came up with because it combines like mom and pop, because this parent is non-binary, which I thought was nice to throw in there. I always like to have a little bit of representation for myself. And then it comes out that there's an issue at Alicia's school, and this is very important because in the government, and especially in school systems, there isn't very much understanding for queer people. And so the premise is that Alicia essentially spoke up in a sex ed class about it being really heteronormative, and that isn't explicitly explained in the comic because I didn't want to info dump and have it be like, because it's already pretty unrealistic just because it's for a class project, but I wanted it to be as realistic as I felt I could make it. And so I feel like a young transgender girl would probably know a lot more about sexual education than her peers, and especially since she is pansexual, about staying away from heteronormativity. And so her parents get called in, and the comic ends with them outside of the principal's office with muffled speaking. And I chose to end it this way because we really don't know how this story would end. We don't know how these characters would resolve anything because, like I said, there's just such a lack of advocacy for queer and especially trans youth in schools who get misgendered or dead named every day. And of course it's getting better, but depending on where these people live when this is taking place, we don't know how it would end. And I would like to come back to this, but I think I would need to maybe come up with multiple endings because I don't feel that I could do justice to this issue without doing further research about it. But yeah, that was my project. So thanks.